key question, right? Because the thing that's different about virtual and hopefully augmented reality compared to all other forms of digital platforms before is this feeling of presence, right? The feeling that that you're in an experience and that you're there with other people or in another place. And that's just different from all of the other screens that we have today, right? Phones, TVs, all this stuff. It's, they're trying to, in some cases, deliver experiences that feel high fidelity, but at no point do you actually feel like you're in it, right? At some level, your content is trying to sort of convince you that this is a realistic thing that's happening, but all of the kind of subtle signals are telling you, no, you're looking at a screen. So the question about how you develop these systems is like, what are all of the things that make the physical world all the different cues? So I think on visual presence and spatial audio, we're making reasonable progress. Spatial audio makes a huge deal. I don't know if you've tried this experience, workrooms that we launch where you have meetings, and I basically made a rule for all of the top management folks at the company that they need to be doing standing meetings in workrooms already, right? I feel like we got to dog food this. This is how people are going to work in the future, so we have to adopt this now. And there are already a lot of things that I think feel significantly better than like typical Zoom meetings, even though the avatars are a lot lower fidelity. The idea that you have spatial audio, you're around a table in VR with people. If someone's talking from over there, it sounds like it's talking from over there. You can see, the arm gestures and stuff feel more natural. You can have side conversations, which is something that you can't really do in Zoom. I mean, I guess you can text someone over or like out of band, but if you're actually sitting around a table with people, you can lean over and whisper to the person next to you and like have a conversation that you can't, that you can't really do with in just video communication. So I think it's interesting in what ways some of these things already feel more real than a lot of the technology that we have, even when the visual fidelity isn't quite there, but I think it'll get there over the next few years. Now, I mean, you were asking about comparing that to the true physical world, not Zoom or something like that. And there, I mean, I think you have feelings of like temperature, olfactory, obviously touch, right? We're working on haptic gloves, the sense that you want to be able to, put your hands down and feel some pressure from the table. All these things I think are going to be really critical to be able to keep up this illusion that you're in a world and that you're fully present in this world. But I don't know, I think we're going to have a lot of these building blocks within, the next 10 years or so. And even before that, I think it's amazing how much you're just going to be able to build with software that sort of masks some of these things. One of the things that we found with hand presence, right? So the earliest VR, you just had the headset and then and that was cool. You could look around, you feel like you're in a place, but you don't feel like you're really able to interact with it until you have hands. And then there was this big question where once you got hands, what's the right way to represent them? And initially, all of our assumptions was, okay, when I look down and see my hands in the physical world, I see an arm, and it's going to be super weird if you see, just your hand. But it turned out to not be the case, because there's this issue with your arms, which is like, what's your elbow angle? And if the elbow angle that we're kind of interpolating based on where your hand is and where your headset is actually isn't accurate, it creates this very uncomfortable feeling where it's like, oh, like my arm is actually out like this, but it's like showing it in here. And that actually broke the feeling of presence a lot more. Whereas it turns out that if you just show the hands and you don't show the arms, it actually is fine for people. So I think that there's a bunch of these interesting psychological cues where it'll be more about getting the right details right. And I think a lot of that will be possible even over, a few year period or a 5-year period. And we won't need like every single thing to be solved to deliver this like full sense of presence. The way that I come to all of this stuff is, I basically studied psychology and computer science. So all of the work that I do is sort of at the intersection of those things. I think most of the other big tech companies are building technology for you to interact with. What I care about is building technology to help people interact with each other. So I think it's a somewhat different approach than most of the other tech entrepreneurs and big companies come at this from. And a lot of the lessons in terms of how I think about designing products come from some just basic elements of psychology, right? In terms of, our brains, you can compare to the brains of other animals, we're very wired to specific things, facial expressions, right? I mean, we're very visual, right? So compared to other animals, I mean, that's clearly the main sense that most people have. But there's a whole part of your brain that's just kind of focused on reading facial cues. So, when we're designing the next version of Quest or the VR headset, a big focus for us is face tracking and basically eye tracking so you can make eye contact, which again isn't really something that you can do over a video conference. It's sort of amazing how far video conferencing has gotten without the ability to make eye contact, right? It's sort of a bizarre thing if you think about it. You're like looking at someone's face, sometimes for, an hour when you're in a meeting, and like you looking at their eyes to them doesn't look like you're looking at their eyes. So
you're always looking, past each other, I guess. Yeah, I guess you're right. You're not sending that signal.
You're trying to.
Right, you're trying to.
Like a lot of times, or at least I find myself, I'm trying to look into the other person's eyes.
But they don't feel like you're looking into their eyes.
So then the question is, all right, am I supposed to look at the camera so that way you can, have a sensation that I'm looking at you? I think that's an interesting question. And then, with VR today, even without eye tracking and knowing what your eyes are actually looking at, you can fake it reasonably well, right? So you can look at like where the head poses, and if it looks like I'm kind of looking in your general direction, then you can sort of assume that maybe there's some eye contact intended, and you can do it in a way where it's like, okay, maybe it's not a fixated stare, but it's somewhat natural. But once you have actual eye tracking, you can do it for real, and I think that that's really important stuff. So when I think about Meta's contribution to this field, I have to say it's not clear to me that any of the other companies that are focused on the metaverse or on virtual and augmented reality are going to prioritize putting these features in the hardware, because like everything, they're trade-offs, right? I mean, it adds some weight to the device. Maybe it adds some thickness. You could totally see another company taking the approach of let's just make the lightest and thinnest thing possible. But I want us to design the most human thing possible, that creates the richest sense of presence. And because so much of human emotion and expression comes from these like micro movements. If I like move my eyebrow, a millimeter, you will notice, and that like means something. So the fact that we're losing these signals in a lot of communication, I think is a loss. And it's not like, okay, there's one feature and you add this, then it all of a sudden is going to feel like we have real presence. You can sort of look at how the human brain works and how we express and kind of read emotions, and you can just build a roadmap of that, of just what are the most important things to try to unlock over a 5 to 10 year period, and just try to make the experience more and more human and social. A lot of people think that the metaverse is about a place, but one definition of this is it's about a time when basically immersive digital worlds become the primary way that we live our lives and spend our time. I think that that's a reasonable construct. And from that perspective, I think you also just want to look at this as a continuation, because it's not like, okay, we are building digital worlds, but we don't have that today. I think, you and I probably already live a very large part of our life in digital worlds. They're just not 3D immersive virtual reality, but, I do a lot of meetings over video, or, I spend a lot of time writing things over email or WhatsApp or whatever. So what is it going to take to get there for kind of the immersive presence version of this, which I think is what you're asking? And for that, I think that there's just a bunch of different use cases, right? I think when you're building technology, I think a lot of it is just you're managing this duality where on the one hand, you want to build these elegant things that can scale and have billions of people use them and get value from them. And then on the other hand, you're fighting this kind of ground game where there are just a lot of different use cases and people do different things, and like you want to be able to unlock them. So the first ones that we basically went after were gaming with Quest and social experiences. And this is, it goes back to when we started working on virtual reality. My theory at the time was basically people thought about it as gaming, but if you look at all computing platforms up to that point, gaming is a huge part. It was a huge part of PCs. It was a huge part of mobile, but it was also very decentralized, right? There wasn't, for the most part, one or two gaming companies. There were a lot of gaming companies, and gaming is somewhat hits based. I mean, we're getting some games that have more longevity, but but in general, there were a lot of different games out there. But on PC and on mobile, the companies that focused on communication and social interaction, there tended to be a smaller number of those, and that ended up being just as important of a thing as all of the games that you did combined. I think productivity is another area. That's obviously something that we've historically been less focused on, but I think is going to be really important for
with workroom. Or do you mean productivity in the collaborative aspect?
Yeah, I think that there's a workrooms aspect of this, like a meeting aspect, and then I think that there's like a Word, Excel, productivity. You're working or coding or what knowledge work, right? It's as opposed to just meetings. So you can kind of go through all these different use cases. Gaming, I think we're well on our way. Social, I think we're just the kind of preeminent company that focuses on this, and I think that that's already on Quest becoming if you look at the list of what are the top apps, social apps are already number 1, 2, 3. So that's kind of becoming a critical thing. But I don't know, I would imagine for someone like you, it'll be, until we get, a lot of the work things dialed in, right? When this is just like much more adopted and clearly better than Zoom for VC, when, if you're doing your coding or your writing or whatever it is, in VR, which it's not that far off to imagine that, because pretty soon you're just gonna be able to have a screen that's bigger than, it'll be your ideal setup, and you can bring it with you and put it on anywhere and have your kind of ideal workstation. So I think that there are a few things to work out on that, but I don't think that that's more than 5 years off. And then you'll get a bunch of other things that like aren't even possible, or you don't even think about using a phone or PC for today, like fitness. There are going to be some new things that you just couldn't do before, and those are going to be the amazing experiences. So teleporting to any place, right? Whether it's a real place or something that people made. And I mean, some of the experiences around how we can build stuff in new ways, where a lot of the stuff that when I'm coding stuff, it's like, all right, you code it and then you build it and then you see it afterwards. But increasingly, it's going to be possible to you're in a world and you're building the world as you are in it and kind of manipulating it. One of the things that we showed at our Inside the Lab for recent artificial intelligence progress is this builder bot program, where now you can just talk to it and say, hey, okay, I'm in this world, like put some trees over there, and it'll do that. And like, all right, put some bottles of water on our picnic blanket, and it'll do that, and you're in the world. And I think there are going to be new paradigms for coding. So yeah, there are going to be some things that I think are just pretty amazing, especially the first few times that you do them, that you're like, whoa, like I've never had an experience like this. But most of your life, I would imagine, is not doing things that are amazing for the first time. A lot of this, in terms of, just answering your question from before around what is it going to take before you're spending most of your time in this. Well, first of all, let me just say it as an aside. The goal isn't to have people spend a lot more time in computing.
I'm asking for myself. When will I spend all of my time in?
It's to make computing more natural. But
yes.
But I think you will spend most of your computing time in this when it does the things that you use computing for somewhat better. So, maybe having your perfect workstation is a 5% improvement on your coding productivity. Maybe it's not like a completely new thing. But I mean, look, if I could increase the productivity of every engineer at Meta by 5%, we'd buy those devices for everyone. And I imagine, a lot of other companies would too. And that's how you start getting to the scale that I think, makes this rival some of the bigger computing platforms that exist today.